Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Chief of the Army Reserve Seminar. I am, hold on. Okay. I am not General Daniels, who was supposed to be the welcoming person today. She unfortunately had a family emergency and could not attend. On behalf of the Association of the United States Army and General Brown, our president, welcome. I thank you all for attending. This obviously challenges getting the reserve component here today for this event, but really am glad that everybody was able to make it and that is here. And thank you all. I'll go on to a video.
I'm ready.
And with that, I know many people here. I've known General Harter and General Dickerson for many years, so I'll pass it over to the moderator, General Dickerson.
All right, AUSA. Hey, good morning. How we doing? That's pretty damn weak. I don't know if you do some PT with the boss. Good morning. That's a little bit. Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Hey, so our theme today is going to be "You Go, We Go," and this phrase is just more than a slogan. It captures reality as we in the Army Reserve and the active duty move together, along with our National Guard partners. When the active Army is asked to deploy, the Reserve brings the sustainment, intelligence, engineers, medical teams, enablers to make the fight possible and sustainable. We just don't fill gaps. We are a part of the total Army. And that's why today's conversation matters. We'll explore how this relationship plays out across large-scale mobilization operations and large-scale combat operations. How we balance readiness, risk, modernization, all to ensure that when the part of the Army goes, we all go together. You'll hear perspectives on capabilities and risk. Have we placed too many enablers in the reserve? What does that mean for LISCO and our readiness for it? Interoperability. How do we strengthen partnerships, whether that's with allies like Australia or with industry leaders who bring innovation at speed? Technology. What can we learn from the battlefield in Ukraine? What shouldn't we learn? And how do we ensure the reserve isn't left behind when enterprise systems are built for active duty use cases? And integration. What lessons can we apply from multi-component pilots and partner nation experiences to build truly seamless formations? Our general today will give us time to dig into these questions, and then we'll open up the floor to hear from you, so I promise we'll have some questions up. At the end of the day, You Go, We Go is about more than soldiers. It's about the entire Army. It's about our partners and allies and the communities we represent moving forward together. So let me introduce our panels for today. Of course, most of you know General Harter, the 35th Chief of the Army Reserve and Commanding General of the United States Army Reserve Command. He leads a community-based force of over 174,000 soldiers across 50 states and beyond. He's commanded at every level from platoon leader in Desert Storm to senior leadership roles across the Army. Sir, thanks for setting the stage for us and allowing us to be here. Our next panelist is Major General Jake Kwan, Director of Strategic Operations at Headquarters DA G357. He's commanded sustainment formations at home and overseas, from Afghanistan to Kuwait, here in the U.S., and he brings a unique mix of operational command and strategic planning experience. In his civilian role, he also works in the cybersecurity sector, so he has a foot in both the Army and the tech world. And a very special guest of ours, Brigadier Michelle Campbell. Joining us from Australia, she has over 35 years of service in the Australian Army Reserve, including command of the 4th Brigade and operational service in Afghanistan as NATO Chief of the Redeployment Fusion Cell. She's also a senior executive with deep experience leading transformations in government and in industry, and earlier this year was appointed a member of the Order of Australia. Round of applause for that. And finally, we have Mr. Jason Atwell, who serves as cyber strategist with Google Public Sector, where he advises governments and companies on cyber risk and intelligence. He's also an Army Reserve intelligence officer, as well as a CA officer, for those who may want to know. He spent his career bridging the worlds of national security, technology, and corporate innovation. So a great panel today, Army Reserve proud, and I think just the one foot in, one door, one foot in the other allow us to kind of talk really broadly about some themes. So to kind of kick it off, what I want to do is introduce our panel members and let them kind of answer kind of a softball question, but really to kind of getting a scene set for all of us here today. So sir, you picked a theme, you go, we go this year. You said before that the Army Reserve is essential to sustaining and enabling the fight. Why did you choose this theme for this year's panel, and what do you see as the biggest challenge the Reserve Forces face today?
All right. Hey, thanks, Kelly. Everybody hear me okay? Hey, I tell you, let me start off by just saying, and I'll answer your question. But it's great to see everybody here, right? And a special thanks to, Kelly, my panel teammates up here. Some of them stepping into the breach, right? So Michelle and I are the only original panelists. And then we had some challenges with TDY. It looks like we had a fair amount of folks out here win the TDY lottery, though. So it looks like good attendance. But had Kelly and Jake and Jason step into the breach. And I think one of the things I love about the United States Army Reserve is the amount of talent we have just across our entire footprint, whether it's what these awesome leaders do in uniform or what they do when they take that uniform off and they civilian up, right? And so I think you'll get a flavor of that here today. I tell you, there's some awesome folks out here. I want to recognize my beautiful wife who's here with me. Been married a long damn time, 37 years. Only reason I'm standing up here for sure, sitting up here. See some great teammates in the audience. I know a lot of Okarians and Usarkians and folks here representing my DCAR, Diane Del Rosso. Got my command chief here, LaShawn, so it's great to see you. Representing, I got one of my old mentors here, Bo Young, former Chief of Staff, United States Army Reserve. So, Bo, great to see you. And Jan Hagler and a couple of my teammates from the 81st. And then kind of weirdly, he wouldn't come up front, Aaron, but I don't know what the relationship is, right? But the father of my son-in-law is sitting way back there in the back taking notes and reporting on me. So Bob Stevens, it's good to see you, man. Thanks for being here. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with everybody. Yeah, I tell you what, so you go, we go. It's kind of it's been our phrase for maybe the last 6 months as we've been driving into AUSA, and Kelly, really, it's not something that we came up with. It's something the Army came up with by design, right? They have designed. We have a force structure that if when the Army goes, we have to go with the amount of enabling capacity that exists in your United States Army Reserve. And you all know the numbers. You've heard me say it ad nauseum, but 90% of bulk fuel petroleum capacity is in the Army Reserve. And weirdly, tanks and helicopters and even the new ISVs need fuel, right? And so that capability is in your United States Army Reserve. We got 100% of some capabilities, signal and theater command type capability is in the Army Reserve. And so what we've been driving on, for the last year is kind of a riff off of you go, we go, but our sole central purpose in the Army Reserve is delivering combat-ready soldiers at point of need in support of the Army and the nation, right? And so something bad happens in the world, there's going to be a lot of us in this room and a lot of our young men and women kitting up. And they're going to be doing it on 39 days of training a year and expected to be able to operate in a very high up-tempo, kinetic environment. And so that's the messaging that we've been driving on and kind of working with our Compo 1 and Compo 2 teammates to make sure they know that we'll be ready, but it's all about articulating risk. And so, again, I'm so proud of the young men and women we have across our formation. I've seen them training, and what they do to balance their civilian careers and get after what they get after for the nation is inspiring. So that's the riff off of You Go, We Go. And thanks again for everybody being here.
Thank you, sir. General Kwan, the Army is reshaping itself for LSCO, questioning long-held assumptions and accelerating modernization. How does this transformation affect the role of the reserve components, specifically USAR, especially in cyber and the electromagnetic spectrum?
Yeah, okay, thank you for that question, and good morning to everybody out there, and thank you, General Harter and AUSA, for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this important conversation. Great to see so many leaders, the folks out there from industry, the total force, and some of our partners. Some of you probably occupy more than one of those box checks there. But the biggest thing is that we're focused on what comes next for the Army and in large-scale combat operations, or LSCO. And when we talk about LSCO, getting back to your question, we're not talking about just bigger battles. We're talking about a scale of mobilization and sustainment that the Army hasn't executed or seen since World War II. And that's an effort that's going to require rapid integration, across components, across domains, and also across the industrial base. And the environment we face today, it demands that level of preparedness. So regarding the transformation that the Army is going through, it's all about posturing ourselves for that reality. We're modernizing our formations. We're fielding those next generation capabilities that you hear at the Warriors Corners or you see out on the floor. We're also rethinking how we train and sustain in contested environments, and that's a lot of what I have to do back in my office. But equally important, we're ensuring that we're aligning doctrine, resourcing, and those training strategies so not only the regular Army, but also the National Guard and Army Reserve can operate as a total force from day one. So from my seat in the G3, that integration, that's part of our daily mission. And the Army Reserve in particular is central to this. With the majority of sustainment, medical, cyber capabilities, along with civil affairs forces in Compo 3, it's the connective tissue that's going to enable the Army to mobilize and sustain the next fight. So as we move forward, we have to continue to work shoulder to shoulder with everybody in this room, the industry partners that are out there, so that we can expand, surge, and regenerate combat power when our nation calls. Modernization, those EMS capabilities and the education that goes behind it, it's not just about equipment. It's all about readiness, those partnerships, and how we end up mobilizing that strength when the nation needs it most. Thank you.
Thanks, Jake. Let's move on to Brigadier Campbell. So from Australia's perspective, where you don't really have a NATO framework, but you rely on strong regional partnerships, how do reserve forces strengthen those partnerships, and what parallels do you see with U.S. efforts?
Thanks for the question. Hey, great to be here, and thanks for the invitation to be on the panel, General Harter. Just to set the scene, I've flown 24 hours from Melbourne, Australia, to get here across the Pacific, and I think that sets the scene for the time, the distance, and the complexity that our geography, the Pacific, presents to us. In terms of interoperability and partnerships, they don't just start when conflict starts. They are built many years before, and so relationships and building on those are really important for that interoperability. When we talk about how do we build them and how are we doing those partnerships? It is all through our exchanges, our exercises, our embeds operations. We train together so we actually understand how each other works, how each other's cultures. So, for example, exercise Talisman Sabre that we've just done recently in the last couple of months, we had 19 partner nations in the top end of Australia and also Papua New Guinea. So that is embedding institutional knowledge, corporate knowledge, that we will build on if we go to large-scale combat operations in the future.
Awesome.
Thank you.
It's good to have you here, Michelle. Thanks for making that trip. And I tell you, there's something about, we were joking earlier, right? The Australian accent and the British accent. When last time I was downrange, right, it was when we had really bad news that we had to brief to the CJTF commander. We just had one of the Brits or Aussies brief, and no matter how terrible it was, It sounded better.
And we always start with g'day, so we're not mistaken for being a Brit.
Thanks for being here.
All right, and last but certainly not least, Mr. Atwell. So, Jason, you've lived in both worlds, both in the corporate innovation at Google and service as a reserve officer in the United States Army. What lessons can the Army Reserve learn from industry about adopting and scaling technology faster, deeper, and particularly in a LISCO environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and again, thanks for having us as well, sir. I think one of the first things to think about is that user-centric approach to what is, not just the capability, but who's going to use it and how they're going to use it in the field. Reservists especially have a lot of experience in that realm, even if they're not a defense contractor or a federal service provider, but they see what their civilian employers do. They see what the solutions that they have to use at their jobs are every day, and they also are familiar with that more rapid iterative approach. You have to have an addressable market, you have to be able to make money, you have to be able to run a viable business. The Army doesn't have those same considerations, but that means that reservists are just naturally comfortable moving faster, making sure that they're actually meeting a commitment or obligation, and then if it doesn't work, be willing to fail fast, be willing to use that minimum viable product and pivot off that. And that's where the difference really comes in between what's experimentation and what's transformation, because being able to incorporate that into business practice is something that industry just naturally knows how to do and is comfortable with. And as Major General Kwan mentioned with LISCO scale, industry's been doing that for years. The last time the Army scaled, the global economy didn't look the same way it does now. The tech sector didn't look the same way it does now. And so the infrastructure, the networks, the capabilities that are required for the Army to do its job, reservists are already using every day, no matter what sector they're in. And then Brigadier Campbell mentioned too, knowing what the civilian population is comfortable with, knowing what different infrastructure, what capabilities, what software they use, where they're comfortable. That does a lot to address interoperability, and industry is well positioned to do that, not just as a commercial service provider, but as somebody who includes a lot of reservists. A lot of people in this room have had that experience, that feedback loop where you deploy, you learn things, you come back to your employer, you help your employer do a better job. That's something that we're already there. When you go, we go, industry goes. Even if it's not just as a service provider, but your Compo 3 folks that go out there, deploy, learn what the Army's up to, and then come back and help their employer do a better job, both in terms of their industry sector, but also in providing service to the Army.
Thanks, Jason. So it makes you think a little, sir, on just, you go, we go was by design. So as a result of the Vietnam War, Army leaders made a decision to put a total force policy into effect, and a large portion of the combat support capabilities were put in the reserve component, specifically in the Army Reserve. And this allows us to leverage, as Jason has said, the certification, skills, abilities that reside in American industry. There links the nation's ability to go to war with a strong connection to its American communities, as well as its industry partners. And I think, a larger portion of the sustainment, as you said, sir, intelligence, medical, are in the Army Reserve. And these, capabilities are absolutely needed if we were to go into a large-scale combat operation. So do you think that maybe we've placed too many enables in the RC, and should this strategy be revisited, or are we looking at something different, sir?
Yeah. No, thanks, Kelly. I think everything's on the table right now. I think you heard the Secretary yesterday during the opening ceremony get pretty animated about, where we are as, an Army technology-wise. For those of you who weren't there, I thought what really hit home for me is, all of our soldiers, they have 10 times the technology on their cell phone sitting at their breakfast table. Then they drive into battle assembly, and they're working on systems that were built in 1983, literally. And so how do you change that dynamic? I think our structure a little bit of the same way, right? We're still operating off a model in the Army Reserve of kind of established in the Vietnam War. It's great. We want to be relevant. We want the nation to go to war. But then 9/11 happens, right? And we have a lot of sustainment capacity, enabling capacity in the United States Army Reserve. But you got a year to kind of get your crap together when you get notice, right? And you were kind of on a routine, I don't want to say routine deployment, but for the most part, we kind of knew what was happening as we rolled into the CENTCOM AOR. Ukraine and what's going on in Europe has changed that dramatically. I think it was this time last year, And it was, again, one of our other awesome international teammates, Mark Lancaster, Major General in the British Army Reserve, also a member of their House of Lords over there. But he made a comment about the war in Europe as we were having like a international roundtable. And he said, hey, right now that war in Ukraine is a battle between two reserve armies because all their Compo 1 equivalents are gone. And so I think the Army, one of the things I focus on when I'm talking to my Compo 1 teammates is articulating risk. And the amount of risk that Compo 1 has taken with how much capability is in Compo 3. Talk about some of our manning challenges. Hey, Chief, that's not my manning challenge, that's your manning challenge. They're driving fuel trucks to the 101st. I don't need fuel. I got plenty of fuel. They're delivering ammunition to, the 82nd, right? We have plenty of ammunition. So it's all in, I talk about risk to Compo 1 with where we are. I think right now the Army we do need to look at Compo rebalance. When I look at some of the war plans and you see how many Army Reserve soldiers are needed in the first, 30 to 40 to 60 days of a major conflict, 39 days a year, and the killing that's going on in Ukraine, are we ready? And so I think that, and that's something the Army's struggling with and churning through. And rightfully so. But we just got to have those conversations. And that's where I'd be interested in my teammates out here. We've got some awesome industry partners on what we can do different in our formation to get the balance right and meet the needs of the nation.
So sort of talking about differences, though, so I'm going to pivot to Jake a little bit here. So thinking about that, and that's our current capabilities that we have. If we looked at the future of what really is capabilities we have today, and we continue to proliferate, but think about, from a contested electromagnetic spectrum, the cyber domain, what things do you think, looking at your seat in the HQDA, should we be looking to the reserve components to provide in the future? What changes do we need?
No, thanks for that question. So just off the top of my head, there's a lot of different changes that are already coming right now as they look at the force design updates and the total Army analysis. There's no shortage of recognition that electromagnetic spectrum operations are going to be what dominates in a future fight. So those capabilities, not just shifting them within the components, but making sure that we, from the total force side, identify what echelons need what capabilities and to do what. The overarching tendency is to just say, we need more, but the first question you need to ask yourself is, what's the problem you're trying to solve at what point on the battlefield? So that's what's going to drive a lot of that decision. There's also the multi-compo formations that are coming up, and this goes beyond EW, cyber, and space. We're also looking at it for sustainment, and those are pieces and parts that, as we continue to, I hate to use the word too much, but as we continue to experiment with how those formations look, when we put active component formations under reserve structure and vice versa. Those are questions that are being visited right now to figure out how we can best do that. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's all about that training strategy. How do we train for what it is we intend to do in a multi-domain fight? And we're not going to get that by doing the same thing over and again. Certain conditions we can replicate in the field. Sometimes we've got there are some rehab initiatives that we have to do in order to get our back 40s right, both on camps, post installations, and stations, both out in the FORCECOM, soon to be USER America's structure, but also at the T2COM structure, looking at Cyber Center of Excellence, looking at the Intel Center of Excellence and places like that. Because we can't replicate those in the Army Reserve. And I know I've heard the boss talk about the Thanos snap quite a bit. It's definitely something that we have to think about. Do we have the right facilities? Are we aligned correctly for that? And then that's going to dictate how we end up training and developing for that.
Too many old people in here. They don't know what Thanos snap is, man.
Oh, yeah.
Go ask your children.
Yeah. Google it. It'd be right up on YouTube. You could probably catch a 30-second short and plenty of memes. So just be careful what you're scrolling.
Don't do it on your government phone.
I do think, though, there's a critical component there, if I may, that the problem-centric piece of that. The Army, reservists kind of naturally have a project management approach to things that maybe the active component doesn't always have. And so we like to do MP, and we spend a lot of time on COA analysis when we maybe didn't really define the problem that well in the first place, and being willing to kind of pivot on that and go back and say, are we actually addressing the root problem? And has this problem been addressed elsewhere? I think that's a really critical thing that the reserves brings to the table.
I think that's something that we're going through. We're establishing we're doing a pilot for our cyber reserve force, and part of the pilot is defining the problem. You know, what is the concept of employment? What problem are we trying to solve? I don't have a solution yet because I'm going to get a presentation on that of the proof of concept next week. So I'm really lucky to meet you folk because I might be tapping your brain next week.
Hey, Michelle, thanks for that, and we're looking forward to that. I think, just from your perspective, though, the Australian Army employs, a smaller force, yet a very critical force in a region where, quite frankly, U.S. forces, we're still learning our way through. So what reliance does your force have on the reserve component, and do you think the Australian Army should reduce its reliance or increase its reliance on the reserve component?
Great question. Thank you.
You notice how she did that really subtly, like, yeah, thanks, dude. I really appreciate it. But it sounded nice, didn't it?
Well, the way my brain works, I like to start from the top and work down to that last bit of the question. So from an Australian perspective, we released our National Defence Strategy last year, and that our strategy is deterrence by denial. And that really focused and integrated our ADF. We've transformed to be more integrated and focused. So what's Army's role in that? So Army is optimising for littoral operations, and also they're optimising their long-range land and maritime strike. So when I say littoral, or when the strategy defines littoral, it's not just the coastal region. It is all about the people, the towns, the communities, the inlets, the airspace, the electromagnetic spectrum. So the so what for that is Australia is a large continent. It's an island continent. It's about the size of continental USA. And our population, 87% of the population lives within about 50 kilometres of the coast. So, we're a littoral nation. But it's also, the Indo-Pacific, that is, dominates the landscape there, Indo-Pacific. So coming down then to the Army Reserve, we've got our Army Reserve Division. So our first division is our permanent division, the second division is the reserves. They've got a clear mission from our strategy through the Army Order to that division. We exercise both of those on Talisman Sabre across the top end of Australia and Papua New Guinea and some offshore territories. So Army Reserve is fully integrated into Army and the ADF. We are all resourced, equipped, funded and trained to our readiness levels, and those readiness levels are defined by the government of the day. The question around, what was the last part of the question?
Just reliance on those capabilities. So is it the right mix? Should it be more reliance, less reliance, or are you guys where you need to be?
So like the US Army, we've also got specialists. So particularly our health specialists, the doctors, surgeons, radiographers and so on. 75% of our specialists come from the Army Reserve. We also think about the band corps. It's not something that you would normally think, but the majority are reservists. And when we think about music, music can be one of those cultural languages that you can really get good relationships and a great strategic effect through music. Very similar with catering. Half our caterers come from the reserve. And we all like to break bread and have a coffee or tea to build those relationships. And fun fact, our last large-scale combat operations, World War II, by the end of 1945, just the Australian Army alone had 17,000 cooks. So, food...
Well fed.
Yeah, food is the fuel of our soldiers, so really, really important. Also, we can talk like this because our history is recorded, and our Army History Unit is comprised of 96% reservists. So, they curate the museums, the collections, they document things in books, and certainly the panel members, you've got a book there as a gift from the Australian Army that is produced by our Army History Unit. So the mix, what was the phrase you used? Reliance on the reserves. Of course, nobody can go without the reserves, and the reserves can't do anything without the full time. We are a full integrated force, and it's mission aligned all the way down to the ground roots level.
Awesome.
I think we might explore that a bit later.
Yeah, I think we should. So I think let's talk a little. So we get the role of the Army Reserve, much like it is on the Australian Army. Let's talk about interoperability, and this is not just with our components, as we learned, which in Australia are service categories. We learned about components and service categories today. Let's talk about other folks. It could be industry partners. It could be allies and partners in a region. So Jason, I want to flip back to you because you had mentioned You Go, We Go includes our industry partners. And I just think about back to World War II, one of the things that we had in America was an industrial base ready for, actually at the time it wasn't, but it got very quickly turned around to be ready for conducting war. So as Army senior leaders are increasingly pursuing some of these commercial enterprise solutions to develop and drive interoperability between not just our services, but our coalition partners, what industry best practices can the Army Reserve learn from organizations such as Google to accelerate and drive increased integration?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, any reservist, if you've had to go back and forth between AVD and your corporate software, you're already a master of interoperability because that's not an easy transition. But I mean, I think one big thing is the idea that you should meet users where they live. You don't need custom software. You don't necessarily need to go back and reinvent the wheel. Knowing what infrastructure is out there that's already being leveraged, and not just from a military perspective, but what is the civilian population doing? Because as CA officers, we know, it's not just about your military partner, but what are the different societal pressures? What are the commercial service providers in those areas? The Asia Pacific region is a great example because you've got Chinese infrastructure all over the place, and not just that, but Western service providers are hooked in some cases and some aren't, and you need to have some awareness of how that's going to play out. And so, thinking about what problems industry has already solved that the Army doesn't necessarily have to wrestle with and come up with some custom solution that's going to take 10 years, but being willing to experiment with things that are already on the shelf. So again, just dealing with infrastructure as it is and your user base where it already lives rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. Those capabilities are already out there. It's a matter of defining the problem in that, whether it's cyber or electromagnetic spectrum, and seeing what industry has already brought to the table in that fight.
And then Jake, just thinking about from the interoperability and leveraging corporate technology or commercial technology off the shelf, if you will, I find sometimes a lot of these use cases really are driven by the active component. So from your seat and what you've seen both from the HQDA staff as well as what you've seen on your corporate side as a civilian, should there be different use cases that are approached? Are there specific RC use cases or reserve component use cases? Should we even dedicate some of our own RDT&E money to some of those things that may be specific to the reserve, or is there another way to look at it?
No, that's a great question. And that's a critical issue that really just kind of sits below the waterline from a lot of people's awareness. You're right. Most of the RDT&E investments have been built around Compo 1 use cases for the regular Army because they're the ones that are in the room making the decision most of the times. It does create real challenges, though, especially when those same systems reach the Army Reserve, and then on a equipping cascade that puts Compo 2 and Compo 3 toward the back end in the older days. That's since shifted, and I'll get into that in a second. But if we want a truly transformational total Army strategy, we've got to design interoperability from the start. And that's going to be one of bringing those reserve requirements in earlier in the process, testing those systems during our own battle assemblies and ATs or other reserve component augmented exercises, and across different operating environments as well. It's kind of easy to fall into that trap that you go to Fort Hunter Liggett, Fort McCoy, and Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst, but that only gives you three areas. You can't replicate what's going to happen with the Arctic and the cold with batteries. You can't get that for, because the experiments that happened with a lot of the drones and small UASs out in Germany when they were saying, hey, we could run this thing for 30 minutes on a battery, and then it fell out of the sky in 6 minutes because, lo and behold, as we all know in the winter here in D.C., cold kills batteries. And then ensuring that those data and mission systems connect, and you have those common data standards, and you have the understanding of that fabric and framework, so that it can be seamless across all three components. Now, should we have our own dedicated RDT&E funding? While the mischievous side of me says absolutely, I'd say it depends. The pragmatic answer is it depends. And the reason I say that is, you got to put the right caveats in there. Because if we did have that funding, it's not so that we build separate systems. And, that's always going to be the temptation, that the individual who has been granted a funding line, they're going to take a look at those use cases and try to build something. But if they do it in a silo, we're right back into the same problem. It's just taking the one off the compo and putting three there. We operate in different footprints. That's something that we all readily acknowledge across the Army. And yes, the active component does see that because 316th ESC, boss, you remember that. We're sitting on the backside of the airport for a headquarters, but you got 12 states, 9,000 people. I think the farthest location I went to was near Maine, where my cell phone picked up the Canadian cell towers. I think it was Rogers. Keep me honest over there. And it was something I had to take a car ferry to get to. I've never done that before. That was interesting. And then seeing signs in the United States where the road signs have French and English on them, that was another culture shock. But that's the type of thing we do. Whereas in the 82nd, the FSB was right there, right next to the brigade headquarters, where you had 1st, 2nd, 3rd Battalion from that 504 Parachute Infantry Regiment. DFAC and barracks were across the street. Sicily drop zone was 3 miles away, and Pope Airfield was 6. So that's the differences there, and that's what we have to account for within that. So yes, we should allow that flexibility to experiment and bring those use cases in so that it's understood, especially with the administrative and training demands that are unique to the reserve component, but also those user access requirements, because that's a constant battle that we seem to be fighting.
I think just to add on to that, bonus points for Jake, using the word mischievous in your response. But I tell you what, and my team has heard me say this ad nauseum, so I apologize for double tapping. If we could impose our bureaucracy on our enemies, we'd shut them down. We wouldn't have to fire another kinetic shot. Yeah. Right? And so the acquisition, you heard the Secretary talk about this yesterday, but our acquisition process, the rules, interoperability, hey, Compo 1 gets this, then it cascades down. I think we're on the verge of just a whole different way of looking at things. Diane was one of the exercise leads for this integrated exercise we did in Mojave Falcon out of Fort Hunter Liggett. And we put so much energy into getting our SIPR network up and being able to operate on SIPR and how's all this going to work. And units were trained and we're validating before we get out there because we wanted to go classified. And we got out there and we were able to, on the JBCP systems, we were able to get up. But it crashed the SIPR network out there in Mojave Falcon. And we kind of came out of that going, let's just go CUI, pull up Vantage, right? And we got to train the mission command piece. We spent so much energy trying to get the network right that we lost the training value for our command teams to some extent. We recovered. Diane's giving me eagle eye right now. We recovered and crushed it. But, up front, our command team's got to be able to mission command on the battlefield, see the site picture, right? It was comforting for me to walk into some of these talks and see acetate. I remember that. I remember acetate. These youngsters had no idea what they were doing. But
couldn't spell Stadler for
yeah,
sure.
but I think we're going to look at using our NAGRIA funds, right, National Guard Reserve Equipping Account, to be able to procure some counter UAS, some next gen C2, operates in the cloud, maybe interoperable with our international partners as well as the other compos, the other services. But we make things so hard. I think now's the time to break those barriers down, do what's right, and just let's buy stuff, test it. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Move on to the next thing.
Don't get him fired up. Just don't.
Sorry.
Hey, so we're going to riff here. So Michelle, not to throw something out of left field, but I'm going to anyway. So from your perspective, interoperability, forget the question I was going to ask you. How does it look from your lens? Because we're here, we can't even talk to ourselves sometimes. How does it feel from an Australian Army now? We're going to come work with you in your backyard, not ours. It's an away game for us. What does that interoperability look from your lens, and what could we do better?
I think we need to start with a dictionary because half of what you've just said, and sir, What are the acronyms?
It was brilliant.
So there's a bit of that. Common language divided by whatever the saying is. But interoperability, yeah, the comms are one thing, but I think a lot of the time the relationships and the long-standing generational trust and consistency over time, that's something that can transcend the communication. We can always go back to having a cup of tea, walking over to someone and having a look. I mean, we've all experienced that probably in the office where somebody, a couple of doors down sends you an email. Like, just walk down the hall and have a conversation. So interoperability, that's always in the back of my mind because we have our own IT systems. You have yours. How do we actually communicate in a time of need? If you can solve that, that'd be great. Yeah. No pressure.
No, but I mean, industry already, I'm not just my employer, but we already are trying to address the maximum number of users we can. Like, we're not worried about the acquisition process of the customer base. We're just worried about whether it is worth their time and energy to invest in it because it solves a problem they have. So, it's one of those things that, again, the Army's in its own way in some ways, in that we assume there has to be some special way to do things when really it's just what are people already doing that works.
Yeah, so that gets back to that point, just to kind of double click on that. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. That's that old Peter Drucker quote. And, the biggest thing is, and, for Michelle, and, the largest thing I see, especially when we started looking at CJAD C2, or now they're calling it Joint Long Range Fires and Effects, the overclassification because of culture. By default, people see it on the SIPRnet, they want to slap secret no foreign. Bam! That takes it off. You can't see it anymore. Or they want to slap CUI on there. So then it locks out those others who are not within the Five Eyes domains. If they're on IL2 for the impact level certifications, then the rest of our other third country partners, they can't get access to it because CUI is mandated at IL5. So without getting into the technical specifics of that, it's just a matter of ensuring that our soldiers know what truly needs to live on what network. And to the boss's point about getting down and operating at CUI, we're trying to do that with SBUE. That's a part of the C2 fix movement there. So the ability to get in, operate in the unclassed environment using encryption and then getting off the X, these are the cultural items that we have to bring in, and I brought that up because of the reserve training strategies there. A lot of our folks, if you tell them to do a COMEX, some of them are still asking about CPOF. And we're like, how long ago was that off? The Army's moved off of that, but that's because that's what's in their cages, and that's what they can train on right now. And they don't want to move up to CPCE because it's bandwidth heavy, but then they can't get a Maven license, so they can't train to get in until they're getting ready to mobilize. So these are all things that we have to take into account, and that does work toward that interoperability question, is just understanding, all right, stop with what you're doing. Get out of the silo, get out of the reserve center, get online, Google it, and figure out what it is that you need to actually use these days.
Legally, that is not a plug for any of it. So speaking of Google, so Jason, so let's riff on that a little bit. So General Kwan brings up some interesting piece of like, we just got to get out of our own way. So we know industry thrives on rapid innovation. When our military acquisition process is notoriously slow, for a reason that did us very well over the last 50 years. So given your background, what is the most significant lesson you think the Army Reserve, and perhaps the Army, could learn from Google's approach to innovation at speed, at scale, so the Army can best learn these lessons and integrate technology faster?
Yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but the Army does need to kind of think hard about the definition of what a minimum viable product is for the Army, and that's 10 years is not going to be part of that definition. Because being willing to move fast, fail, test something out, see if it works, get rid of it. And Google, for better or worse, and we're not the only ones that do this, but we periodically will kill a product because it's no longer addressing a market, or it doesn't work, or the technology's moved on. The Army rarely kills things. It has a relatively bad habit of bolting a new GUI on top of old software and calling it a new product. And so, I think that's something that the Army needs to learn, is that every now and then it's okay to say, this software sucks. We're going to go with something new now. Literally starting from scratch. And I think PEO reform will do some of that when you look at sort of a product-centric approach to developing things, so that you're starting from ground zero and building new technology rather than trying to grandfather in something into something that already exists. Like the Army just has to get better at saying that sometimes tech debt should be abandoned.
Well, maybe, so Jason, let's talk a little bit. We talked culture, right, Jake? So how does the Army get a better culture then? Because part of this is, in our culture, it's not like, well, I used it last year. I'm going to use it again the next year, and it's what I have. So, and I'd love to get from you and Michelle and Jake, just from our corporate backgrounds, how do you change the culture then? We can give it to the boss to kind of summarize what that is. So, Jason, culture, Google. How do we get some Google into the Army?
Well, I think that knowing what experimentation looks like, as opposed to like capabilities development, because we almost go backwards. We go from like the AROC process and then we start building something, rather than maybe starting with elements of what we think we need to get to and working through it as more of a project-centered approach. You talked about like reserve centers and how we get things done. I mean, a lot of reserve centers don't have Wi-Fi. They might have intermittent, power capabilities for the things we're trying to experiment with. And so you go out there and you say like, okay, what's the minimum thing I need to train? And you focus on that from a mission perspective rather than from a compliance or risk management perspective. Because, industry, for better or worse, we can do better in some areas where we worry about security or risk later. It's not necessarily true with everything that we do. The Army tends to go for like this G6 risk management thing first and say we got to check all these boxes, when really it's working backwards from the problem or the capability that you want to see in the field. And so that's what real innovation is. It's let's actually change the way we do things rather than trying to incorporate a new thing into the way we've always done things.
And
So what I heard Jason just say, wearing his Google hat, was eliminate the G6s of the world.
I would never suggest such a
You
thing.
wouldn't suggest that? Okay. I thought I pulled that out. Okay.
But I mean, it's not a bad thing to put the 6 back in the position of being a true service provider,
Right.
rather than yet another checkbox that we have to go
Amen. Thanks.
Yes, I think so Jake, being on the HQDA staff, so transformation and contact, that's where our chief is trying to get us to get into that mindset. Are there some parallels to your position back in the corporate world and transformation and contact, and is that really working in a way to get us to where we need to be?
The short answer is I think yes. And from the chief's side of it, and the secretary for that matter, he's given considerable latitude to the field commanders to get out there and do what they need to do. He's very clear that he has a higher risk acceptance and risk tolerance for this. This gets back to that culture question you were bringing up. I think right now what we're going to see is that innovators will be rewarded, not just those that hold the line and move the trains. The other thing is he's trying to work toward breaking that fear of failure, and that's not at the individual soldier level. At the tactical level, those soldiers are doing great things. I just used this example the other day where I was out at JRTC, and it literally was a captain with $500 worth of components and a $250 drone and a soldering iron, and he programmed a Raspberry Pi card. He built the carrier for the form factor that he programmed, and he threw it up on a drone. And he scanned the entire training area. And he found every cell phone, Wi-Fi puck, things that aren't supposed to be out there in the box, and all the other items that were giving off electromagnetic signature. And that's a captain. So imagine if we crushed that under the ASALT Enterprise, the ability to get them like just, I said, EW in a tackle box, right? Just give them some components in a fishing tackle box and let them go to work, and you'd be surprised what you get. But the other point, and Jason, you and I got to work with this and see this firsthand with the AITTX back when you didn't have a beard. The secretary he's clear on it. Perfect is the enemy of good, and he's putting that out in different phrases, different forums, and he wants to see faster movement on this. And he wasn't afraid to bring in those vendors that he mentioned in his opening speech. The $15 trillion of market cap sitting around the table. It was truly a sight to behold, because it's like people that you read about in the news, like that 26-year-old that got bought out from one of the AI companies for $250 million. Sometimes I question my life choices.
Yeah,
Just kidding. I love my purpose here. I really do. But the bigger part of that is there were a lot of naysayers at the beginning who were like, how are you going to do this? You're going to have people coming after you because of the lack of competition. And it's actually false. There was plenty of competition there because he's opening up with other initiatives too. Project Fuse, as you heard that. So getting out there and doing that, that's really the direction that we have to move. I think that you're going to see that, and it's the other plug I'll put in from the HQDA side is, with the other older equipping strategies where you end up seeing a equipping cascade. The rearm working group isn't putting up with that. They want to move faster. Remember, Next Gen C2 came up as a big topic. They said 5 years, and Chief said, no, go faster. And then they brought it up, and they said, okay, 3 years. And he's like, where's Compo 2 and 3? And then they brought it back and said 2.5 years, and Compo 2 and 3 is now mixed in across all 3 fiscal years that it's going to be rolled out. So this is what you're going to see coming down the pipe. What's old is not going to continue. So.
And Michelle, so put your corporate hat on. Innovation, whether it's in the Australian Armed Forces, what we could learn, in our own U.S. Armed Forces. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we've talked about risk a little bit, but not dollars. And I think from my project management background, we talk about risk and costing risk because, it's great that we can articulate a risk, but if it's going to cost you $4 trillion to fix, is it really a risk? So there's that fiscal responsibility about having awareness about how much things cost. And in Australian Army, we've got this thing called makerspace, and it's very much like what you were talking about, where you're given a very small budget and just be innovative and work out, can you build a practice grenade that's electronic, so you don't actually have to go on the grenade range, and you can get the drills and all that sort of thing going in a safe space. So then, when you do get on the grenade range, you've got the drills down pat, and you're firing live grenades.
Yeah, and speaking of technology, so we've had this war in Europe now for a few years. And, the lessons that we can learn from it, maybe the lessons we shouldn't. So, Jake, I want to throw it to you just from thinking about the Russian-Ukraine conflict. We see a lot of the drone piece. We see a lot of it's interesting, you've got some of the future technology in use today, but then you see some of the World War I even attributes of trench warfare. So what future technologies is the Army or should the Army consider as it seeks to continue to dominate in a LSCO environment?
No, thank you for that one. So what I'll start by saying is, to your point about using old technologies, there are some things about war that are just immutable. No amount of technology, no amount of time is going to change it. It's a gritty fight to find, fix, and close and destroy those enemies that you've been tasked to get after. Regarding the technologies, though, I hesitate to throw specific ones out there, but I will tell you a lot of the priorities you see are going toward electronic warfare capabilities, not just small UAS, but counter small UAS, because the drone swarms have freaked everybody out, but there's already innovation in that space. Cyber, and going with radio frequency delivered payloads at the edge, so that divisions now through SEMA DETs, or the cyber and electromagnetic detachments, that they can go ahead and deliver payloads on the field that you previously might have had to rely upon Sanctuary for. Understanding those data capabilities, that's the way of the future for now. But very similarly, and I bring this up as a recurring anecdote, I was at the Institute of National Security at Vanderbilt. No plug there, because that is where I came from. But the bigger part is they hold an annual summit, and Sam Altman was speaking, and they were kind of focusing around AI. And the one thing that he talked about was, at that time, this was back in April, he said, we're kind of running with GPT 3.0, 3.5. We're about to roll out 4.0 in the summer. And if you're trying to study on how you're going to get 3.5 out, when 4.0 releases, that's going to have exponential more capability and processing power than the 3 and 3.5. But then 5.0 is going to be released in the following year, probably in the spring of 26. And again, more exponential piece. So now start thinking about the Army and how we do training, manning, and equipping and the timelines it takes. Well, what happened as you look? 4.0 was released shortly thereafter, and 5.0 hit the streets this past summer. And if you haven't already been using it, you're already behind as they're developing the next iteration. So those are things to consider on the future of the battlefield. Russia, Ukraine, that is one theater, one type of fight. What about the Arctic? What about the Pacific? When we start looking at what General Clark talks about, polar bears to penguins, Hollywood to Bollywood, how do you close that gap? Those are all different things. So it's not going to be just one thing. There are technologies out there probably on the show floor that I haven't seen yet that I would say, hey, that's a great idea. Let's get this in. Let's try to find a way to get it in front of the secretary or the DUSA or the under, so they could see this with the chief and the vice, and they can make a decision and maybe reprogram some money to get after that if it is something revolutionary. If not, get it into that the fuse space, get it into that venture capital type, the Shark Tank competition. I'm eagerly waiting to see how that goes. But we just don't know what we don't know. So it's that unknown unknowns that we just have to be prepared for and try to think about how would we absorb that faster? How would we get through the acquisition process so that we're not getting crushed by our own bureaucracy, but using that bureaucracy on the enemy, right?
Well, I think one thing, though, to add to that, though, for my teammates out here, especially my NCO Corps, we can't get away from soldiering, right? So the way that they're surviving on the battlefield in Ukraine, and we were just down at Fort Polk, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, the Command Sergeant Major and I met with Geronimo, which is the OP4 down there, and so they're employing all kinds of, Ukrainian lessons learned in the box at JRTC, drones and cyber and EW. If you want to survive, it's 24 inches of overhead cover. It's camouflage and concealment. It is dispersion. It's being able to move every 3 hours, right? So I think, and I know that's not where Jake was going, but we tend to use technology as a crutch. Woe is me. Hey, we just got to soldier up. One of the brigades that was fairly successful at JRTC was a brigade from the 82nd. They went in and shut off all their comms for 8 hours. So they did their rehearsal. Into the box they went, no communication. Now they got a little disaggregated and disoriented. The OP4 had no idea where they were. And the OP4 was like, and so the OP4 started pinging a little bit and showed themselves. And so just for my teammates wearing the uniform, don't lose sight of how important it is, some of those basic soldier skills, because that's how they're surviving in the box at the CTCs, and that's what's leading to survival on the battlefields over there. So that's what we got to stay after. The linchpin for us, I've seen, battalions. If the battalion command team has their crap together, their units are doing pretty well. If the battalion command team is disengaged, is not sure what right looks like, is waiting for someone at the brigade or higher echelons to tell them what right looks like, at company level, they're working hard, but they're extremely frustrated. So that's where we're trying to focus our energies, through the MSC commands, general officer commands, make sure our battalions are equipped to get after what they need to get after.
So I'm reminded at ASEP-C, I think General Rainey said it very clearly to us in the class. He said the last 100 meters of combat haven't changed since the history of our country. It should never change. Make sure you prepare for it. So thanks for that, sir. Hey, so we're going to open up some things. We'll still riff up here, but what I'd love to see, and since I know there's about 40 people I know in this audience, I can pick on you by name. Microphones to the front. Please come up, ask a question. This is the time, the place to kind of really challenge our leaders and really what we're thinking about. We'd love to have some of that debate. So please just walk right up, and then I'll call on you, and we'll have some folks up here. And Charlie, good to see you back there. Hop up. Oh, see, already they're ready to go. Let's just go off that.
Okay.
Good morning. I don't think it's on.
You're
It's
good.
on? Okay.
It's on, yeah.
Good morning. So my question is, we've talked about costs. We've talked about, being able to, I think General Campbell kind of summed it up when she mentioned the risk with the cost. Sir, this question is for us. Knowing that we are not adequately funded, to be as agile, what are we willing to divest so that we can invest?
Yeah, I think, so start off with, thanks for the question, right? But start off with, hey, I articulate and we articulate everything in terms of risk to the mission and to the total Army, right? So when you say we're not adequately funded, there's probably some truth to that, but funded to do what? Right? So when I engage with the chief or the secretary or my teammates do, right? Chief, you're asking me to do this, but you're funding me to do this. Right, so if you want this, you got to help me make up the difference. Yeah, there are certain things we can pull some levers, but they're not huge. I think transformation-wise, how do we make sure the Army Reserve remains relevant? And we're looking at where we can invest in some of these, some of the technologies like counter UAS, make sure we're trained up. We're pushing equipment overseas, right? We can't maintain what we got here in CONUS, and so not funded to maintain it, right? So to kind of get after that problem set, we're looking to position some of our equipment in Europe and in the Pacific. I already have some on the ground in Europe. Put a maintenance company over there, so now I can send mechanics over. They can draw their kit and fix other things, right? And so those are how we're trying to get after solving some of these problems. Again, it's articulating risk. It's articulating risk. There is not going to be a pot of money that falls out of the sky. Golden Dome might have some opportunities. We'll see. We're looking at how the Army Reserve will tie into that. I've been coached on that, but there's not. So we got to get after what we know the nation needs of us right now. So we're looking to balance. And I'll tell you, you've heard me say this, no idea too crazy. I think our stationing model is archaic. Right? It takes us 5 years to build a $100 million reserve center that demographics shift in 8 years, and we can't man the formation. Right? And so why are we doing that? The Thanos option. If I could snap my fingers and get rid of 500 reserve centers, I would do that in a heartbeat. Build 4 more Fort McCoys, fund kids to travel there and train. Right? So we're looking through all kinds of different ways to get after that. But I still got to deliver what the nation asks us to deliver, so it's how do we balance it? Yep.
Morning, sir.
Jan, here we go.
So first, many thanks to Brigadier Campbell for referencing the band and history units, 2 types of units near and dear to my heart. But my question is for the 3 of you in your corporate world. So we've heard about how our recruiting challenges and what we have and how much better the technology and the work is on the outside. So from a corporate perspective, what does make Army service on the technology side appealing, if anything?
That's a great question.
It's a great question.
Keeps your clearance active.
I think we start with clarity about what we're there to do, clarity of mission. So I started with the strategy and filtering that down to the mission, and that's what I articulated when I was a brigade commander. We are here and aligned to Army and the ADF. So I think once the soldiers understand and have that clarity and their mission is aligned, they're funded, they're resourced, they're trained to the level of their mission. And that gives them that purpose, that sense of service. And you can't put money on that. That's what they want to do. And their training has to be hard enough that they're really challenged, but not hard enough that they're, get in the terror zone and they walk with their feet. So it's that balance where the training needs to be optimal for their mission, and then that reinforces their purpose and mission.
Yeah, I would say she hit the nail on the head. Purpose. Finding your purpose. And right now, as I was actually talking to some former coworkers earlier today, not specifically on recruiting, but it just reminded me, based on the conversation, about the focus areas that they have. I mean, here we're focused on mission. We're focused on the soldier. We're focused on the nation. These are things you don't get readily in corporate America. They tend to be buzzwords. They tend to be up on the walls in some places, and some do a better job of it than others. But at the end of the day, the corporation lives or dies by its profit margin. It lives or dies by its ARR and how much the street punishes them for not having enough annual recurring revenue. So naturally, you're disincentivized from those other activities that may require more money in order to accomplish those purpose-driven items, but instead focusing on a product or focusing on a particular service that the entity provides. So when it comes to, and I have a teenager who I have to drive to school now because Fairfax County, I love him to death, but they say that he's not entitled to bus transportation because we're out of the district. But the best part about that is it gives me 25 minutes of windshield time with him every morning. So either to yell at him about his grades, talk to him about why he should or should not go to Virginia Tech. Yeah, he's actually,
Hokies.
I still prefer Vanderbilt football, but
That's pathetic state of affairs.
But at the end of the day, when we're talking about his future, that continually comes up. And at 15, he's got a very acute sense of what it is he wants to do and why. And so when I pull that thread in the car, a lot of it comes, this generation, they want to make sure that what they're doing is meaningful. They've seen it. There's been the talk of the excesses of the corporate world. I mean, you just have to flip onto any news channel and somebody's going to talk about compensation structures or, inflation or different things. But they want to make sure that what they're doing matters. And that's something that we have to harness. We need to tap into that. And we uniquely get to do that because we don't live or die by annual recurring revenue or a profit margin. I mean, our purpose is very clear, and that's to fight and win the nation's wars.
And I think that's reflected,
ahead,
in
Matt.
the recruiting and retention stats that the Secretary mentioned yesterday. So we're very similar. We're seeing the best recruiting and retention that we have in decades. So, I think the clarity.
Yeah, and I think the flip side of that too is after a certain point of their careers, reservists are in the reserves because they really want to be there. It's very easy to get out or go into the IRR and just kind of ride out your time. And so I don't know how many civilian employers are in the room right now, but like making it a little bit easier for your reservists to do their reserve service is critical because you also are going to benefit from what they bring back to you. And so there's a two-way street there.
Yeah, I think, so my employer, I'm here because they said I could come here this morning. But that was a conversation we had. I'm not coming to work for you if you have to ask me about my Army service. And they really valued that. I think another thing, too, for us across, I think this be in the Australian Army, what we can do as leaders in the Army Reserve is make drill weekends hard, meaningful, and purpose-built, and get out of these reserve centers that the boss has said he wish he'd get rid of. Sometimes I can't find all mine because I'm like, I don't want to see you there. I want to see you in the field. So, being able to meet that purpose with an environment or media to exercise that purpose would be great. So I think we're over here next.
Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Rob Behrman. As we look at transforming and modernizing and building new capabilities into the reserves that fit the future fight, but we also look at rebalancing the capabilities that we provide to the Army and the package of what we're going towards, what sort of capabilities do we think, or what makes a capability better suited to live in the reserves? And how can we apply that as we think about the new capabilities we want to invest in our formations?
Who wants to take that? All right.
I mean, go ahead. I would say the human capital intensive stuff belongs in the reserves. Your CA, your MI. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. You want to leverage people with the time for extensive civilian education or tech careers or things like that. I mean, a lot of AI gets a lot of attention right now, but like basic automation should be pulling things like finance, HR. Not to pick on the Signal Corps again, but a lot of Signal Corps could be automated. Large parts of cyber to free up the parts of cyber that do require brain power. And then you can have those talent pools sit in Compo 3 because now you've automated it and you've got active duty kind of babysitters watching it. But I think that's where the real promise of a lot of AI gets used as the big brand, but really we're just talking about basic automation, actually posturing ourselves for data analytics. Because we don't want people doing basic math. We want people thinking about what we're going to do with the answers we get.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of pull that thread a little bit more, I think I'm going to answer your question with a question, which is, to what the boss was getting at earlier. What do you want the reserve to do? Let the form follow the function. Okay, don't let the function drive what that form is going to be. I don't believe that there is such a thing as a reserve-specific piece of kit or technology. Last I checked, the same TA-50 we use in Compo 3 is the same that they use in Compo 1. The Net Warrior sets, if folks go out into the field and have a need for that, they're going to be using the same things. So really it just gets back to what's that risk trade-off and how do we look after they answer the rebalancing question. I think that's what's going to drive that.
Yeah, I think, Rob, so there's always this constant balance that we see at our level between readiness and relevance, right? And so and the relevance piece drives resourcing, which is real. John Campbell hit on that, right? Brigadier Campbell hit on that. And so, and kids want to do stuff, right? So they want to go out and do stuff, drive trucks, shoot weapons, get out in the field. And so you balance, say, what are the capabilities, to Jake's point, that the Army needs, and what can we recruit to, right? And so that's just the constant balance of that readiness and relevance piece that we churn through. I think the other piece to this, right, is And again, I think no idea too crazy right now. You know, what is the Army Reserve's role in the homeland? And as the homeland mission escalates, right, so just had a sustainment brigade come off the southern border, right? Got some engineer formations heading that way. I think there's, you know, contested logistics. What's going to be contested here in the homeland? You start looking at where the Army Reserve can plug into homeland mission sets, DISCA, those kind of things. That's going to be more robust. I mean, that's why we're looking for some fires in this next TAA as we go through kind of some structure. What kind of protection capability does the Army Reserve need? Not combat arms for my National Guard teammates who are in here and they'll freak out, right? But protection capability, right? To protect our footprint. And how could that nest with what's happening in the homeland to help with the defense piece? So I think that's nascent. We're still figuring that out, but nothing's off the table, what the Army Reserve should look like going forward. Good question, man.
Thank you.
Fantastic suit.
Do you have something, Michelle?
Yeah, I was just going to say the lens that I like to look at is what can only Army do? Whether it's Army or Army Reserve, what can only Army do? And that's what you do. When we talk about homeland defence, our most recent bushfires in 2019, 2020, we had a lot of force that was supporting all the states and the state authorities and the emergency services. You know, we plugged in with a lot of logistics and planning and those sort of factors, but, you know, they did what they do best. So I think that's a really good lens to go on us as well.
Good afternoon, everybody, generals. I'm an Army Reserve TPU ARE soldier. I represent the U.S. Forces Korea as a reservist. I can take my clothes off and put my uniform on and fight tonight. I like the ability to be plug and play with the active duty Army or whatever part of the Army or military joint force needs me to serve in. I'm extremely proud of what I do and I'm here to support the effort and let you know that I'm here. As a reservist, I'm looking for my next mission right now with the Joint Task Force 401. When I talk to the Army about the next mission, or even my commanders at USFK, they don't know who we are as reservists, as ARE reservists, what our capabilities are, and our ability to get right in that formation immediately. We need to advertise a little bit better what our capabilities are and how we can assist immediately.
Yeah. Yeah, you're the tip of the spear for that. Right? I mean, I agree with you. You know, you talk about, it's been one of my frustrations, what is the Army Reserve brand? Everyone could finish this sentence. The few, the proud. Everyone in this room can finish that sentence. What is the Army Reserve brand? Right? What are some of the uniqueness that we bring? And so I agree with you. But where I need your help and your teammates, right, that are out there training with our active component and our Guard teammates, is you got to help me sell the brand. Right, and so I am constantly, you know, I poke the chief very lightheartedly and very professionally, along with Freedom 6, right, General Pappas, just about all that we bring to the table. And don't forget, right, that we're a critical part of the fight. And it is a constant education piece. I think our teammates overseas, right, USRPAC and USRAF, understand Korea, understand much better because they are relying on us to execute day-to-day missions.
I bring continuity when I come forward.
And expertise, right? So appreciate what you're doing. If you got any, you know, you can send us an email, any other ideas on selling that brand, because we're doing that constantly. Don't blend in. Make sure they know who you are.
I think it's important to sort of talk about it. So blending in, we tend to, you know, just humans will get to an area, a new group, and we want to be like the group. I think as you have said, being a proud reserve component officer, when I go somewhere, I'm like, no, I'm from the living room, is how do we make sure that's okay and promulgate that, and really for the more senior folks to do that. So I think one thing we could do is, in General Klein, I'll hit him up with this, because I'll be headed over there in August. Happy to go and talk to whomever. And I know that General Brunson was very particular about how he wants more reserve component over there. So I'll get with Marty, sir, and just on, hey, here's all the folks that are going over general officer and CSM-wise. Those are folks that can speak pretty loudly about what we're doing. We'll give them the placemat and say, here's where we're at and here's what we do. And that's a way to do it. But I think the point of the spear being getting from you and where can we also integrate into there to speak that narrative. Is that fair?
Fair enough.
Awesome. Thank you.
Ma'am, gentlemen, I'm Jack Gaines. I run the 1CA podcast, and I'm also in the Civil Affairs Reserves. I just spent a year over at Joint Staff expanding how intelligence supports irregular warfare. I would love to go back to my unit and brief them on what we did, what we're working on, but I can't because it's a cinder block that has no security clearance. And I would love for you to snap your fingers and get rid of all of those old buildings and actually get us facilities that have SIPR, JWICs, both in network but also in briefing space, because I can't tell them what we've done. There's no way. And so we need to do that. We need to have client integration. My unit is the 353 Civil Affairs Command. Our client is UCOM. We don't have UCOM's emails. We don't have their network access. We don't talk to them on a regular basis. And every unit has that client that they have to support, but we're not integrated in how we talk to them. We're not integrated in training. And we should disappear into them. They should see us as just an expansion of who they are. It's just that we show up a little bit, less than once a week.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comment. I think,
Kyle, come on my show.
yeah. I didn't know we had a CA podcast. That's, I learn something every day. But I will tell you, I think, so where the Chief's going with, FORSCOM becoming Western Hemisphere Command or U.S. Army of the Americas, and now you're going to have Third Corps allocated to Europe, and you're going to have I Corps, allocated to USAPAC, right? And there's a lot more regional alignment. I see that happening with our KCOMs, right? And I see, not that there's not a formal relationship, but a much more formal relationship with the ASCC that you support. Because you're exactly right. You should be doing that training. That's the right thing to do. We got to work through it with the Army Reserve on service retained. What does that look like? As far as the reserve centers, I'm all in. Whether it's tearing them down. I've been told by all these awesome gee-whiz minds up here that we can put all this SIPR stuff in the cloud, right? And I know that there are non-Army folks who can do SIPR in their home from anywhere because it accesses something on a cloud that's all encrypted and their device is encrypted, right? Briefings might be we got to get out of this archaic way of doing wired red line, green line business. It's insane, right? And so I'm with you, and so we're trying to drive through that. I hope you share what you learned regardless.
I will. By the way, 1CA Podcast is the only military Peabody nominated show.
That's awesome. All right. I must have missed my invite.
It's going to be a theme of CA, sir.
Yeah.
Another CA officer coming up here. This is great.
Hi, yes, Kelly Rockwell, 352 Civil Affairs Command, and in my civilian capacity, I work with Ernst & Young as a digital risk manager, consulting manager. My question is mainly for you, Mr. Atwell. So I know in Guam recently, the Air Force had great success with Google's GDC, distributed cloud, and during a recent mission, where is Google tied in with the Army and Army Reserve in similar capacities, similar missions?
I just would like to state, Jason, before you answer that.
Yes, sir.
When this young captain said, GDC, she looked right at me and then spelled it out. Distributed cloud. And I was thankful for that because I had no idea what you were talking about.
It's one of our easier ones, and one of the ones we've changed the less frequently. We change the names of things all the time, so it's not your fault, sir. But I could get into more detail on it at length, and I've got some colleagues here too that can walk through some of it. But the long and short of it is we're engaged in a number of different places. I'm sure you're aware that Google is relatively new to the Army as a customer, but you saw a good example of the stuff that we're working on. There's also there's some efforts in motion to make that more widely available in more theaters. There's also some efforts in motion to get Gemini made more available through its own dedicated instance rather than something where you have to go to Ask Sage and pull it down. So Google's leaning forward hard in a lot of places to help the Army meet mission. And it does kind of go back to the question about network availability. As CA folks, we know that when you're out there, it's a lot easier to work within the culture than it is to try to change it, and that goes with technology as well. So rather than trying to come up with some new tech that you're going to impose on our allies and partners and civilian organizations, let's go meet them where they live. So I'm not sure how well I answered your question. There's a lot in your question. I'm sure you know. But yeah, I thank you for giving me a chance to plug the fact that, you know, Google's doing a lot with the Army right now. I mean, the secretary is a fan of our tech. I don't think that's a secret, so.
Follow-on question before I turn it over to you. Will there be opportunities to discuss more of this at the upcoming Google Public Sector?
Yes, it's pretty much all you'll hear about at that,
Okay.
so I'm be
Army
excited.
specific? Or?
Not Army specific,
Okay.
but I mean, but that's what's interesting about, you know, the promise of cloud adoption is that you can replicate very rapidly what other services have that works within the Army, without having to go through some new acquisition procurement process. Because if you know, you've done the paperwork with DISA or whoever the service provider is, and you've got the right authorizations, it's fairly easy to lift and shift and recreate that environment, you know, in a different level of availability for a different client.
Excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Dan Reardon. I was 307th Engineers for 3 years prior service back in the day before 9/11, 1 year in recruiting duty. Had a big break in service, went Border Patrol, missed the camaraderie of the military, so joined the Army Reserve, did 11 years there, from Arizona to some units on the East Coast as well. And I'm glad the fitness standards are starting to be enforced now. That was a good announcement. And just wondering, on that last 100 meters, we saw a lot of that lacking with just firearms qualifications. I was glad I had the federal law enforcement experience so I could teach people around me, but it was pretty sad to see others that we hardly did any basic firearms training from, especially even on pistol with counterintelligence, but even rifle training was like, you do your qualifications and that was it. There was no training, no movement drills, nothing besides the basic skills.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. I appreciate you serving, appreciate you doing the Border Patrol thing, my friend. I tell you, that's one of the things we're trying to get back to. I hate to say back to the basics, right? But like in one of the briefs that comes to me and some of the other senior leaders right now, we are tracking ammunition usage, right? And I've had, you know, and qualifications specifically on crew serve platforms, right? So I had put in something before general officers I approve their OCONUS leave. I look at what the qualification standards are for their formation. And so, now I will tell you, it's hard, right? I get it. Again, this gets back to the Thanos option of getting rid of reserve centers. I got units that aren't near a range, as you well know. I mean, it is a weekend event. If you are not, you know, stationed near a training platform, it's a weekend event to get out to the range, and so we just got to make that a lot easier, working with our Guard and Compo 1 teammates. But CSM, he's back there in the back. He's tracking that with the Sergeant Majors at Echelon to make sure that we are getting after basic soldier stuff, that we don't get fascinated, although I love all the tech stuff, right? But at the end of the day, you got to be able to shoot, move, and communicate. Right. General Lucky had a lot of, you know, with Cold Steel was fantastic when he was doing that, you know, 7 years ago, whenever that was. But and kids love doing that. Right. And the 84th, I'll let Kelly talk about his Master Gunner program and what he does on how we're trying to solve that problem.
Yeah, I'll spend about a third of my ADOS dollars, which, you know, are tight. We've got a senior gunner program. We'll go out to the ranges, meet the soldiers where they're in the dirt before they even get out there. Right. Everything from how to set a range up, how to do your ammo request, how to actually operate, you know, the range itself. And then we'll come back a year later and, you know, hey, let's go ahead and just observe. Let's take, just like we would an OCT perspective of it. And what we've seen is, as folks come to like Mojave Falcon, they're coming ready to shoot. Folks have seen that weapon system before, and now they can get to the advanced techniques. And even if they don't get, if they're not there yet, at these large training apparatus, we can actually provide that level of training as well. So I think getting back after, that's what soldiers want to do. Like, again, make that weekend purpose-built. That does mean you take risk as commanders. And I think us at the senior levels, we have to underwrite that risk by saying, I'm not looking at your metrics. I'm looking at the things that matter most: shoot, move, communicate, decommunicate, sustain, and medicate. Right. So being able to do those things, if you can't do that, you can't get to the last 100 meters of that combat. Thanks. I got a question. One more question, or did you have something?
Do one more here. Let Chief go. Let Chief go.
Chief, last but not least, the morning.
Good morning, sir.
A warrant officer to close us out, man. It's terrifying.
Chief White is brimming with pride right now. Don't mess this up.
CW4 Jeff McGill, ARSC. Sir, we have innovation capabilities within the USAR that are exploring avenues in AI, med bio, UAS, among other opportunities. How can we enhance those developmental capabilities and opportunities without exploding into its own assault? And how do you foresee, or what do you foresee as the next fields that the innovation opportunities, the Innovation Command should explore?
Well, I tell you, and I'll open up to the panel here if they want to respond to this or any closing thoughts. But Chief, good to see you, right? Bad buddy from downrange. I think it's, so one of the things that I grapple with is how do you integrate our battle rhythm to get after kind of what you're talking, like who owns innovation for the Army Reserve?
75th.
If you ask Michelle, she would say so. There's also folks at OCAR that think they own some of it. There's folks at USARC that think they, so the 75th, I would say, is the command nexus. And so it's driving on, so we want everybody to innovate, right? And I think Compa 1 is, I don't want to say they're having this challenge, so everyone's got their own kind of innovation lab and, 80 seconds guy. But then how do you weave it together so your lessons learned and you get some momentum? And so I think a battle rhythm to drive on kind of good innovation ideas, some seed money if we can use NAGRIA to test things out, those kind of things. I think with the battle rhythm, General Perna, one of my mentors, drove that home with me. Good battle rhythm to integrate with the commands, I think, is the key. What the next wave is, I'll let these experts answer. I mean, I don't know. I think I kind of get what Jason was saying earlier about, hey, we can get after a lot of mundane things with the tech out there. Why we're still doing, how we pay soldiers is still mind-boggling to me. Why a kid can't scan in with his CAT card. We track everything. I know IPSA, for all my AG folks out there, I know you hear how much I hate AG, but I love you all as human beings, right? But, I mean, it's just, IPSA is so freaking painful sometimes. But that's something I think that's where the tech can help solve those basic problems as opposed to, a next generation weapon system for the Army Reserve. That's where I would like to see it veer to make us much more efficient, make soldiers' lives much easier so they can get after the business training.
Thanks, sir.
But I appreciate that.
If you could cut down the emails, that'd be great too. I think that goes back to what you said earlier, sir. It's the last 100 metres. The human face of warfare has not changed, probably will not change. So that foundation warfighting skills, being able to shoot, move and communicate, are absolutely the backbone of the Army Reserve.
Yeah, I think that the promise of mission command is kind of restored by technology in a way, because you can focus on the actual hard part of the mission, and you can, standardization only makes sense in places where it makes sense, right? And so you even mentioned, the task organizations of some of these units, freeing up space on the roster to have, what General Kwan described a minute ago with the drone manufacturing cell within a unit, like letting units have some flexibility to do those types of things. That way it's not so much about funds, but it's about, bandwidth and personnel allocation. That way they can focus on their mission and not saying that every single unit has to do the mission the exact same way. It makes sense to standardize ammunition. It might not make sense to standardize drones or what sort of like mobile devices the unit uses or something like that.
Yeah, and just to kind of close out on that, Chief, the biggest thing I would put the plug in for is, as you're doing the innovation, you're experimenting with something. I have a question. How are you getting that out to the force? And if you're not doing that, then you're doing the same. You're creating your own mini ASAult that doesn't leave your reserve center. And I'm sure that's not the intent of your folks that are, getting out there and trying to find new ways to do different things or, gain some efficiencies. I'd put the plug in for something like the Harding project, but write about it. Put it out there. Don't be afraid to put pen to paper. I know the Army Communications and Outreach Office, you got to clear it with them, and they're fairly quick about it. It only takes a couple days. But there's nothing, especially with all the AI tools and the LLMs you have, that you can help write an article on that and get it out. Talk about what you learned, because that's how you gain some of this attention. And if you think the chief's not reading this stuff, I get that through the Harding Project. There's always like 5 articles, and there was one guy in my shop. He wrote an article, and the next thing he knew, there was an outreach from one of the chief's folks to send a coin and a memo because their article was selected for the top 5 articles that month. So they are looking at this. So you want to. It's not just enough to get out there and tinker, but you have to tell people what you did. So treat it like the science fair and throw up the poster board. Huh?
And we owe you the process for that, Chief. And the 75th is setting that up like an innovation hub to plug into and share best practices, and so we'll get that out.
Yeah, I think
Thanks.
the thing I'd add is everybody can't be innovating. Someone's actually got to be training. I hear all these folks. I mean, honestly, everybody's transforming in contact. No, you're not. You're not. And if you think you are, you're not, because you're not all designated to do that. I think part of this is who has access a system called Quick Strike? Anybody? Anybody know what it is? Center for Army Lessons Learned. Everything that comes out of every single rotation in the CTCs, everything that goes into AARs, all that goes into Quick Strike. There's an AI algorithm in the back end that actually seeks who's innovating what. So again, back to the point, Chief, of how do we make sure we integrate these pieces? Let's figure out who's doing what now, develop a larger design of experiments so we know who's doing what. Oh, you're working on that over there? I don't need to replicate what you're doing. Maybe I focus on something here. And I think just going to whatever makes us more ready, sir, as an Army Reserve, that's where I think we need innovation. How do I get from fort to port faster? How do I skip all this other bureaucracy that I just don't need to have? If we can innovate there, then I can get into the fight. Then when I train them at these training centers, I know they can get to the fight. So we're going to end here. Sir, do you have any final comments before I wrap us up?
Yeah, how about I just wrap us up? You got anything hot to say?
No, sir. Just thank you guys for being here.
Yeah, no. Hey, listen, thanks to this awesome panel, right? Some folks reacted very quickly when the government shut down to be on this. So, Kelly, Jake, Jason stepped into the breach. Awesome. Thanks to Michelle for traveling 24 hours to be here. Principal doing all this corporate stuff there and being the director of the Army Reserve there, getting ready to fleet up, be director of the whole reserve forces for Australia. And thanks to my teammates out here, right? So industry partners, fellow Army Reserve soldiers, international partners, appreciate you being here. All compos, we can't do this without you. I just say, hey, continued message for me. Your Army Reserve is enabling capability and capacity for the nation. Articulate risk in terms of risk to Compo 1. And if you're a leader in my formation, keep training soldiers. Like, you can't innovate all the time. We got to actually get after the business of defending the nation. That's what we do. So honored to be here. Twice a citizen, combat ready.